Imagine your loved one vanishes without a trace on Thanksgiving Day, never making it to the family dinner she had promised she'd attend. Days turn into weeks, then years, as hopes fade and questions multiply. The only clue, a boyfriend with shifting stories, a missing rug, and a trail of blood that leads nowhere. Until, nearly 2 decades later, a shocking discovery is made at a forgotten construction site that flips the entire case on its head. This is the case of Cynthia Alonzo. But before we explore this case any further, my name's Joshua Miles and I cover lesser known true crime cases from all corners of the world here on my YouTube channel. If that's something you think you'd be interested in, then please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on any true crime cases. And with that being said, let's delve straight into the case of Cynthia Alonzo. Cynthia Linda Alonzo, known as Linda to her friends and family, was born on Sunday, the 9th of September 1956 in Manhattan, New York City, the United States, to her mother, Corinne Wallace. It's unclear whether her biological father had been in the picture, as he's not mentioned in any of the sources, so it's likely that he had little involvement in her upbringing. What we do know, though, is at some point during her childhood, her family moved to the West Coast, to San Francisco in California. The absence of Cynthia's biological father in her upbringing left her mother, Corinne, to shoulder the responsibilities of parenthood alone, which was a dynamic that forged an unbreakable bond between mother and daughter. Not much else is publicly known about Cynthia's life on the West Coast as she grew into adulthood, but what we do know is that Cynthia grew her family to include 5 children: Tishone Banks, Teresa Jones, Anthony Alonzo, Tyrone Jones, and LaShawn Jones. And by the year 2004, Cynthia lived in her Oakland apartment with her now 18-year-old daughter, Tishone, her granddaughter, Shaquila, and her son, Anthony, creating a multi-generational home. Family had been Cynthia's compass, and Cynthia's mother's home in San Francisco had served as the epicenter for family gatherings, where Cynthia's laughter and presence had been constants, which was why her sudden absence was so noticeable and alarming. On Thanksgiving Day, Thursday the 25th of November 2004, Cynthia's family waited for her to arrive at her mother's house in San Francisco. You see, Cynthia had been close to her family and would remain in close regular contact with her mother, Corinne Wallace, and all 5 of her children. She nearly always ensured to attend family gatherings that took place during the holidays at her mother's house, and Thanksgiving had been her favorite of the bunch. Cynthia had reassured her mother and her children that she would be there to celebrate Thanksgiving with her family, but that 2004 Thanksgiving would be the catalyst for an over 18-year-long investigation and decades of pain. You see, as the minutes ticked into hours, Cynthia failed to show up at her mother's house, and that was very abnormal. It had been around the time of this Thanksgiving holiday that Cynthia and her boyfriend at the time, a man called Eric Stewart Mora, who she'd been with for about 2 years, had been experiencing what was described as a rocky period in their relationship. On top of that, Cynthia had been having some issues with a woman by the name of Linda Heyman, who had been the mother of Eric's 3 children, Eric being her boyfriend. Now, Linda Heyman and Eric had actually been together for nearly 30 years before she discovered voicemails on Eric's phone that revealed that he was having an affair on her, on his wife, with Cynthia. Up until Linda Heyman making this discovery, Eric had primarily lived at Linda Heyman's East Oakland house, though understandably, after Linda had confronted Eric and made him choose either her or Cynthia, and after Eric had chosen Cynthia, Eric moved out of Linda's house, and his primary residence then became his house on Brookside Avenue, which he shared with his brother Mark and his brother's girlfriend, Sybil. And just when he thought that the relationship drama was over, at some point, Linda Heyman and Eric actually reunited and they got back together, which saw Cynthia break off her relationship with Eric. Though this breakup was also short-lived and they got back together again, it seemed very on and off. Now, according to Teresa, who was Cynthia's daughter, Eric actually owed Cynthia money for some work that she had done for him. And Cynthia's daughter Teresa believed that her mother Cynthia wouldn't leave Eric until he paid up the money that he owed her. Cynthia had also told her daughter Teresa that Mark, who was Eric's brother, and Mark's girlfriend Sybil had wanted Cynthia and Eric to break up due to the fact that they were concerned that Eric had promised to buy Cynthia a house with some money that he had expected to inherit. Teresa was actually once involved in a physical altercation with her own mother, Cynthia, Eric's brother Mark, and Mark's girlfriend Sybil, during which Mark actually hit Cynthia in the face, and Sybil threw water on Cynthia, which subsequently saw Teresa hit Mark with a frying pan. Now, on Saturday the 20th of November 2004, 5 days before Thanksgiving, Teresa had been unable to get a hold of her mother, Cynthia. Teresa had grown so concerned that she ended up going over to Eric's Brookside house to see whether he had seen her mother. And Eric, when asked, appeared to become angry and frustrated, and he told Teresa that he and Cynthia had had a big argument and that had ended in Cynthia leaving in Eric's car. The following day, on Sunday the 22nd of November 2004, Teresa rang up Eric again to see if he had any idea where her mother was, and Eric told her that Cynthia had gone to the store before adding, quote, "I just want you to explain to me what your mother's personality is, because I can't seem to understand what kind of person she is." Now, Teresa was somewhat baffled by this request and told Eric that after 2 years of dating her mother, he should probably know what her personality was, and that if they were unable to stop fighting one another, then that's probably a really good sign that they should not be together. Eric responded to her by saying that he loved Cynthia and that he wanted to make their relationship work. Furthermore, he told her that he had intended to go with Cynthia to her mother's house for Thanksgiving that year. Now, later that same day, Teresa was actually able to get in touch with her mother, who was actually quite upset with Teresa because Teresa had told Eric that they should break up. Teresa explained to her mother that she just wanted to protect her, to which Cynthia responded that she needn't worry and that their future would be brighter and that she intended to, quote, "start taking care of her business in the right way." Cynthia then confirmed with Teresa that she would see both her and LaShawn at their grandmother's, Corinne Wallace's house for Thanksgiving, though Cynthia would never show up to her mother's house, and neither would Cynthia's boyfriend, Eric. And naturally, her family were very surprised that Cynthia would miss this family gathering for her favorite holiday, and they tried to reach her and call her and get in hold of her and get in touch with her, but they were unable to. It was to no avail. It had been two of Cynthia's downstairs neighbors, two women by the name of Dorothy Easley and Katrina Hall, who had claimed to have seen Cynthia on that fateful Thanksgiving day in 2004. Now, according to their testimony, Cynthia had stopped by their apartment at around 2 p.m. that Thursday in November, and she told them that she was going to get ready for a family gathering at her mother's house and that her boyfriend Eric was going to be taking her there. Cynthia stopped in again later to say goodbye, and she had been carrying a small backpack with her. Dorothy Easley and Katrina Hall then saw Cynthia get into Eric's blue Mercedes with him. Now, Eric's brother Mark would later testify that he had spent Thanksgiving Day of 2004 at his grandmother's house with his girlfriend Sybil and his daughters. He claims that he did not see Eric until he returned back home later that evening. And when he had returned back home, Eric had been in his downstairs bedroom. Mark had gone up to it and knocked on the door, and he told Eric through the door that he had brought him home some dinner. Eric then told Mark to leave it outside the door, which Mark did. And later, when Mark asked Eric about Cynthia, he told Mark that he had dropped her off at a liquor store 2 or 3 days before Thanksgiving. The day after Thanksgiving, on Friday the 26th of November 2004, Teresa stopped by her mother's house, but she was nowhere to be seen. And so Teresa went into her mother's bedroom to find a big mess of clothes everywhere. Interestingly, she was unable to find the small backpack that her mother usually carried around with her that contained her makeup and her EBT, which is the electronic benefits transfer card, which holds her food stamps and a cash benefit. Just pointing out real quickly that it's believed that this same small backpack, this small little bag, was the one that the neighbors saw her with on Thanksgiving. Now, Teresa did find, though, her mother's wallet that contained her ID, her social security card, and debit card in its usual place under the mattress. So she had not taken her ID and she had not taken her debit card with her. Later that same day, Teresa went with her sister Tishone to Eric's house on Brookside Avenue. Eric told the sisters that he hadn't seen their mother for 2 weeks. So this was the day after Thanksgiving Day. He had told them that he had not seen their mother, Cynthia, for 2 weeks. But the day before, he had told his brother that he last dropped her off a few days ago. But then the neighbors claimed to have seen Teresa the day of Thanksgiving getting into Eric's car. Make it make sense, Eric. Teresa would later describe Eric's demeanor as, quote, very nervous, shaking, and weird. Quote, He was real fidgety. He was constantly moving his hands, and you could see his hands were shaking. Now, when Teresa brought up the fact that she had a phone conversation with Eric about a week prior, during which he had told her that he had just seen their mother, which goes completely against the whole "I haven't seen her for 2 weeks" saying that Eric was trying to spin, Eric replied, quote, "I told you I haven't seen your mum in 2 weeks." So again, another hole in his story already emerging. Eric then told Teresa that he had last seen Cynthia a week ago, when he had dropped her off at a liquor store. A very interesting account. He's already changing his story, and surely he would remember the last time that he saw his girlfriend of 2 years. Now, this entire time, the two sisters had actually been stood on the doorstep of Eric's home, and after some, relenting, he eventually let Teresa into his house. Presumably Teresa wanting to go in to make sure that, her mum wasn't inside the house and that, there was nothing untoward going on inside. She was really concerned for her mum's well-being. So Teresa went straight into the house and went up to Eric's bedroom, and she immediately clocked that a large rug had gone missing and that a table had been moved. And further, Teresa noted that furniture had also gone missing from the living room. Eric, though, didn't seem to appear concerned with Cynthia's whereabouts at all. He didn't even offer to help look for her. He just was like, well, damn, I guess. It was at that point that Teresa told Eric that she believed that he was lying about something and that she intended to call the police. And Eric responded quite quickly with this and quite intensely and heavily discouraged, is how it's written in the court documents, heavily discouraged, so you can extrapolate from that what you will, that she didn't contact the police. So you can only imagine how heated that got. Now, Teresa hadn't been the only one to be confused with Eric's reaction, with Cynthia's mother, Corinna Wallace, also later describing Eric as unconcerned about Cynthia's well-being or unconcerned with trying to find her. Eric had even told Corinna Wallace about 2 or 3 weeks after Thanksgiving in 2004, they did not know of Cynthia's whereabouts. So he was claiming to not know where she was, and also appearing to not care. It appeared that he couldn't care less. Later on, Teresa had her brother Tyrone go with her to meet them at Eric's house, and a confrontation actually occurred with Mark and Eric. Now, according to Mark, who is Eric's brother, Tyrone had a gun and he threatened Eric. You've got to remember that as far as Tyrone and Teresa and all of the siblings knew, was that their mother was missing, and Eric, her boyfriend, was acting really suspicious and had a story that didn't make sense. And they were really emotional. It was their mother. So you can kind of get why they went over like this to try and get this information out of him. And at some point during this confrontation, Mark told Teresa and her brother to, quote, "Ask Eric. He knows where your mum is at. It's not me, it's Eric. He knows where your mum is at." To which Eric then replied, quote, "Mark, don't tell them that." It's unclear how exactly that confrontation ended, but what we know is that after that day, Teresa would return to Eric's house some 15 times, each time desperately trying to look for any sign of her mother. And I must point out that it wasn't just Teresa of all of the siblings, all 5 of Cynthia's children. All of them were desperately trying to find her. And on one of these times that Teresa had gone there in early December of 2004, Eric told her, quote, "Holly Rock came and picked Cynthia up from his house." So now he's changed the story once again, claiming that somebody had come and picked Cynthia up from his house, rather than him dropping her off at a liquor store, or him not seeing him for 2 weeks, or any of the stories that he's concocted that just don't make sense. He's changed the story once more. Finally, on the 6th of December 2004, so about 11 days after the Thanksgiving that Cynthia didn't show up for, Teresa called the police to report her mother as missing. Officer Jacqueline Shaw of the Oakland Police Department responded to the missing persons report and, at the request of Teresa, went to Eric's house in order to inquire about Cynthia. According to Officer Shaw, Eric appeared, quote, very nervous and, quote, agitated. And when asked about Cynthia, he told Officer Shaw that, quote, "She's not here." Eric did proceed to invite Officer Shaw and her partner to enter the property, which was when Eric, quote, "started rambling about things I wasn't asking, like he was providing information, anticipating a question that I was going to ask. You know, his hands were very fidgety. As I looked at his hands, I noticed scratches on the back of his hands. It was more of the fact that he was fidgety and just seemed agitated that I took to be nervous. According to Officer Shaw, the scratches on Eric's hands, quote, were kind of jaggedy, fairly superficial in terms of depth into the skin, but kind of wide in nature. It was almost like they were cat scratches or wider. I would think they would look like fingernail scratches. That was my impression. Now, Eric told Officer Shaw that he had not seen Cynthia since 2 days before Thanksgiving, which is when he claimed to have dropped her off on 24th and Martin Luther King Boulevard in Oakland. Eric confirms that at the time they had been arguing and that they had been out of contact due to the fact that their relationship had been on the rocks. After Officer Shaw's partner determines that Eric was actually on probation with a search condition, and Eric had a criminal history of some more petty crimes, they decided to handcuff him and place him in their vehicle. During the subsequent search of the premises, Officer Shaw noticed a discolored patch of the living room floor that did not appear to have been sanded, or like things had appeared to have been like under renos, if that made sense. But there was a weird discolored part in the living room that appeared to have not been touched, which was strange. Now, in one of Eric's vehicles, they found what was described as a, quote, large, sharp-looking knife-like object. When the officers released Eric from their vehicle, he was, quote, very, very sweaty and seemed very, very nervous. Officer Shaw then noticed a, quote, really bad cut in the web of Eric's hand. And when she asked him about this cut, Eric stated that he, quote, had cuts all over. Look at all the work we're doing on the house. Of course I have cuts. Eric then, quote, rambled out real quickly that he cut it on some glass that he threw away in the trash can. When Officer Shaw asked whether she could see the glass, Eric simply replied that it was, quote, long gone. Now, it had been Officer Daniel Castanho, a missing persons investigator for the Oakland Police Department, that had filed the original missing persons report for Cynthia and had entered her information into a national database. Officer Castanho also created a flyer with Cynthia's photograph and information, which was broadly distributed to the media, law enforcement, and elsewhere. On Wednesday, the 8th of December 2004, his partner, Officer Steve Buchala, was assigned to the case, and the two officers then went to Eric's house. Eric, who appeared once again quite very nervous and sweating, talking really fast, came outside to meet them. The two officers described Eric's behavior as odd, looking around, shaking, with his voice breaking in places. At the same time, Eric did not appear to be concerned about Cynthia, who he had told them that he had last seen, quote, 2, 3, 4 days, let's call it 4 days before Thanksgiving, when he had dropped her off at Captain Liquor's on 24th and Martin Luther King Boulevard at 10 a.m. 2, 3, 4 days, 2 weeks, a week. She was picked up by someone? What's the truth? What's the story? Eric, something isn't adding up here. What's the truth? Eric described his relationship with Cynthia to the officers as based on, quote, drugs and sex, and that was about it. The following day, on the 9th of December 2004, Eric rented a kit for sanding floors, and he would actually return the kit the following day on the 10th of December without having used the finer grit sandpaper. John Villarosa, who had been the man who had rented the sanding kit out to Eric, later testified that when a floor is sanded with only rough grit sandpaper, sanding lines remain on the floor and the wood grains will more quickly absorb dirt. Now, photographs that were taken of Eric's floor indicated that the floor had retained some of its finish and that it needed more sanding. Further, a criminalist by the name of Todd Weller later testified that if you sand a floor enough, evidence of blood would actually be removed. Interestingly, Eric's wife, Linda Heyman, would testify that the floors in Eric's house were being sanded in order to prepare the house for sale. It had also been on that Thursday, the 9th of December, when a news story about Cynthia's disappearance aired on television, which provided a phone number for anyone with any information about Cynthia's disappearance to use to give any tips. It would be to this telephone number that an anonymous individual would call up Teresa and tell her that if she wanted to find her mother, then she should look at the Lake Temescal Children's Playground, a playground that was located about a block from Eric's house. Teresa visited this playground the next day with several family members and friends alongside Cynthia's dog. The dog actually located a backpack in the mud that appeared similar to the one that belonged to Cynthia. Though it is important to note that Officer Buchala would testify that Teresa had told him that it had been her brother Tyrone that had found the backpack and not the dog. Teresa then called the police about the discovery, who responded with a search team that had included Officer Buchanan. By the time the police arrived, though, the family had moved the backpack to a picnic table, disturbing any potential forensic evidence. The police used dogs to search an area of, quote, disturbed ground near the parking lot, but they were unable to find anything of significance. Officer Buchanan did take a look at the backpack, but found, quote, no distinguishing marks at all on it. It must be noted that no forensic testing was conducted on the backpack. On the 10th of December 2004, Officer Buchanan returned to Eric's house at about 8 a.m. And when he got there, he could hear a machine that sounded like a floor sander and could see Eric sanding the living room floor. When Eric answered the door, he looked astounded and looked to have been covered in sawdust. Officer Buchanan would describe the sanding work as, quote, pretty sporadic. Eric told Officer Buchanan during the visit that he wanted to clear up a lie that he had told the previous day. Eric then explains that he did not drop Cynthia off at 24th and Martin Luther King, but rather, quote, over off of Athens, where he claimed she was going to go buy drugs. Eric explained that he had misspoken earlier as he did not want to be a snitch. However, Eric did continue to appear to be unconcerned about Cynthia, and he did not indicate that he had tried to call or even locate her. Subsequently, Officer Buchanan pursued other leads. One of these leads, for example, involved Officer Buchanan following up on information that he'd received that Cynthia had actually filed 2 police reports a few weeks before Thanksgiving. Officer Buchanan had discovered that Cynthia had also applied for relocation funds from a local organization by the name of Victims of Violent Crime, who provide grants and financial support for those who were victims of violent crime. He'd also obtained the transactional history of Cynthia's EBT card, which was her benefits card. When this transaction history was analyzed alongside the transaction history of Eric's EBT card, it showed that between April and October of 2004, both of their cards had been used several times within moments of each other at Captain Liquors. Captain Liquors being a local corner store that sold obviously liquor, but other items inside as well, like some food items. On top of this, someone had made balance inquiries, which required the knowledge of both the EBT card number and its PIN number on Cynthia's EBT card 4 times in December of 2004, which was after she had disappeared. It's important to note that Cynthia's EBT card had last been used to purchase food on the 23rd of November 2004 at 4:23 p.m. at Captain Liquors, which was 2 days before she would fail to show up to Thanksgiving. Now, Officer Buchanan did try to locate the CCTV surveillance footage from Captain Liquors in the hopes that it would show the identity of the person who had made the balance inquiries, though the footage of the store's EBT machine was not available. Whether that means it was wiped or whether that means the camera simply wasn't working is unclear. But what that does mean is that the footage was a dead end. Finally, Officer Buchanan contacted several of Cynthia's neighbors and checked in with local hospitals in an effort to locate her, but this did not see any more leads develop. At some point towards the end of December of 2004, Officer Buchanan somehow lost track of Eric, and Eric failed to appear for an appointment with Officer Buchanan that had been scheduled on the 14th of December 2004. So Officer Buchanan surveyed Eric's house during the last week of December in 2004, but he still couldn't find him. When they questioned Eric's brother Mark and Mark's girlfriend, they both denied having any knowledge of his whereabouts. It wasn't until much later in that December that Officer Buchanan began to transition the case to a homicide detective by the name of Sergeant Derwin Longmire. Officer Buchanan and Sergeant Longmire worked together to obtain a search warrant that was signed on the 26th of December 2004 to search Eric's house and 7 vehicles that had been linked to him via DMV records. Both Mark and Mark's girlfriend Sybil had been at the home when the search took place, and it revealed the following evidence. In one of Eric's cars, they located a large knife with a 10-inch blade and leather sheath, alongside a canvas bag with paper bands described to have been the kind used to sort money, and these bands had the numbers 8,000 and 2,000 written on them. In Eric's blue Mercedes, they noted missing floor mats and carpeting from both sides of the front seats. They further noted missing carpeting or upholstery from the area behind the seats, and missing carpeting from the trunk. Inside the house, the officers noted that the main floors had been sanded in a, quote, haphazard and very uneven fashion. The floors in Eric's bedroom also appeared to have been sanded. Todd Weller, the criminalist we mentioned earlier, had accompanied the officers, and he had found a slip and 2 shirts in the laundry room that had bloodstains on a wall in Eric's downstairs bedroom, and bloodstains on the door between Eric's bedroom and the laundry room. The bloodstains on the bedroom wall were both about 14 inches from the floor, one being 3 inches long while the other had been about an inch long. This bedroom wall was described to have been moldy in places, and there were marks indicating that the area had been wiped in a non-uniform way. There was also a blue sheet hanging over one window, which concealed bloodstains hidden by mold. When sprayed with a chemical called luminol, the wall gave a, quote, strong positive reaction, which likely indicated the presence of blood. Todd Weller would later testify that he found nothing about the pattern of sanding on the floors in the main room, which would indicate that the sanding had been done in order to remove material from any particular location. After the search had been executed, Sergeant Longmire and another sergeant by the name of Sergeant Nolan interviewed Eric's brother Mark and Mark's girlfriend, Sybil Strouter. Sybil told the investigators that she and Cynthia didn't get along. According to Sybil, Eric and Mark had taken out a loan of $75,000 on their house in the fall of 2004, and Cynthia had told Sybil that she, Cynthia, was going to get a share of Eric's money. Whenever Sybil would inquire as to the whereabouts of Cynthia after Thanksgiving of 2004, she claimed that nobody would answer her. And neither Sybil nor Mark were able to provide an explanation for the blood that was found by criminalist Todd Weller in Eric's bedroom, but Sybil did tell Sergeant Longmire that blood in the house could be explained by a home invasion that had taken place the year before in 2003. During that home invasion, 2 men apparently pistol whipped Sybil, Mark, and their house guest. Mark, in turn, said that he was surprised and upset to learn that the floors in the house had been sanded, and insisted to the authorities that he'd played no part in that decision. The police later ran DNA tests on the blood-stained clothing items that had been found in Eric's house. Blood on one of the shirts matched Cynthia's DNA profile, with a secondary donor matching with Eric. Blood on another one of the shirts matched with Eric's profile. Now, Sergeant Longmire spent, quote, weeks upon weeks upon weeks looking for Eric, but to no avail. He had followed up on information from Officer Bucala that Cynthia had filed 2 police reports and had applied for victim relocation funds shortly before her disappearance by talking to Sergeant Ferguson, but he failed to generate any leads. Sergeant Longmire said later on that he did not know that Cynthia's application for relocation funds had actually been granted on the 17th of November 2004, although this information was interestingly noted in Officer Bucala's missing persons report, so it was kind of overlooked. And this was a piece of evidence that the defense would later use kind of to frame their story that police didn't really believe that she'd gone missing, if that made sense. Like, this is a piece of information that could indicate that she had gone missing on her own accord, if that makes sense. But whatever the case, Sergeant Longmire continued to survey Eric's house periodically from 2005 to 2007. And it wasn't early in 2007 that he noticed that a realtor sign had been placed outside the house. Sergeant Longmire contacted the realtor and found out that Eric had been in the area, and so he obtained an arrest warrant for him. On the 22nd of February 2007, Eric was arrested and then interviewed after waiving his Miranda rights. During this interview, Eric initially denied having a wife or a girlfriend, or even children. He would repeatedly refer to Cynthia as, quote, that girl, and told the authorities that he had met her through a man by the name of Darrell White. Eric would eventually state that he'd been going out with Cynthia for a couple of months when she had disappeared, which, as we know, is not the truth. They'd been going out for a number of years, albeit on and off. Eric confirmed with the authorities that Teresa, Cynthia's daughter, had come to his house looking for Cynthia, and he had insisted that he had not seen Cynthia since the, quote, wintertime somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas, or between September and October. Eric told them that he had last seen Cynthia on Grove Street near her home. He would later then tell them that he had last seen Cynthia when dropping her off at Athens Street, quote, well before Thanksgiving. At some point during the interview, Sergeant Longmire explains or indicated that Cynthia was not still missing in their view, to which Eric responded, quote, so she's dead. When Sergeant Longmire confronted Eric with the fact that Eric's blood had been found in his bedroom and that Cynthia's blood had been found in his bedroom, he completely denied knowing how that could have happened. And when he was asked where he went, where he disappeared off to, Eric explained that he'd left the area for Nevada, quote, when things got hot because of Cynthia's disappearance. After the arrest of Eric, Sergeant Longmire obtained a search warrant to search Eric's house and blue Mercedes. However, when Sergeant Longmire arrived at the house on the 27th of February 2007, it had been mostly empty. The sergeant then got warrants for both Eric's DNA and the DNA of Eric's brother Mark. Subsequent testing revealed blood on the door between Eric's bedroom and the laundry room that matched the DNA of both Eric and Mark, with Eric being identified as the donor of the higher of the two bloodstains on the door, and Mark being identified as the donor of the lower bloodstain. Now, while Eric had been in jail under arrest, recordings were made of his phone conversations with his wife, Linda Heyman. In one of these conversations, Eric insisted to Linda that he had sanded the entire floor and not just certain sections. He'd also insisted that he knew nothing about the presence of Cynthia's blood in the house, telling Linda that it was likely to have been a police trick rather than actual fact. Now, the police also interviewed the realtor that had been hired to sell Mark and Eric's house, a woman who we'll simply refer to as Diana. Diana had first met with Mark to discuss selling the house in spring of 2004, and at this time, Diana recommended some work be done on the house before putting it on the market. In particular, she had recommended painting the exterior, though it is important and interesting to note that she did not recommend any specific work be conducted inside the house. When Diana later visited the house in November of 2005, she noticed that somebody had covered the vents that had been around the bottom of the house, which was something she would never recommend someone do, because you need to have adequate ventilation inside a property, otherwise you're going to get mold. Also in 2005, Diana had noticed an, quote, unusual odor coming from the underneath of the house, which saw her instruct them to clean out the basement to mitigate the smell. Diana first met Eric in person at the house in 2006. Her handyman had submitted a proposal to paint the interior and refinish the floors on the 29th of May 2006, and then the house was listed in November of that same year. In the disclosures prepared for the buyer, Diane had noted that 2 large holes had been dug in the sub-basement of the house, which had been covered with boards. Diana described the larger of these holes as 5 foot by 3 or 4 foot in width and 2 to 3 feet in depth. She further noted a large concrete slab in the sub-basement that served no apparent structural purpose. At later trial, Diane would describe a conversation that she had with Eric during the home inspection in 2006, and he had told her with a, quote, little smirk on his face that when you put a certain chemical on a body, it will disintegrate. Diana could not recall what had prompted Eric to make that comment or what chemical he had named. She did, though, recall that he had made the comment when they were standing in the unfinished storage area of the house. Sergeant Longmire later testified that he didn't recall Diana telling him about Eric's comment during his investigation. Eric was formally charged by information with committing second-degree murder on the 20th of May 2010. The trial against Eric Stuart Maurer commenced on Tuesday, the 3rd of January 2012, after quite a lengthy legal process, during which Eric hired and fired a number of attorneys and went through 2 preliminary hearings before finally standing trial. It was also reported that he had rejected a deal by the prosecutors in which he would have been convicted of voluntary manslaughter in exchange for leading the police to Cynthia's body. During the course of the trial, a lot of evidence and testimony was presented. And it must be noted that Cynthia's body had not been found at the point of this trial. She was presumed dead. The judge stated that there was enough evidence to suggest that Eric was responsible for killing Cynthia. A piece of interesting testimony at the trial had come from a former inmate, Patrice Fluker, who had met Eric in a holding cell at the Oakland jail in February of 2007. Patrice later served time with Eric at the Santa Rita jail, and according to him, Eric offered to compensate him for his help using the telephone. You see, Patrice had an advantage over Eric in getting telephone reservations due to his gang affiliation. Patrice knew that Eric had been charged with Cynthia's murder and had met Cynthia once or twice through her daughter, LaShawn, who had been his close friend. Eric asked Patrice to testify at his preliminary hearing that he had seen Cynthia on a particular date in November of 2004 in exchange for $1,000. Patrice agreed to this, telling Eric that he would falsely testify that he was with Cynthia and others on the 24th of November 2004, the day before Thanksgiving. He also agreed to testify that Cynthia was, amongst other things, a prostitute, a crackhead, and a scam artist. Patrice testified that Eric had repeatedly talked about Cynthia in the past tense and referred to her as, quote, the bitch. Once, after Eric learned that the police had found Cynthia's blood in his house, he had told Patrice, quote, the bitch is still haunting me, even from her fucking grave. When Patrice told Eric that the police could use luminol to find blood, he responded, quote, not with what I used. He further told Patrice that the police had searched his house with the aid of cadaver dogs, but that they had found nothing. Later, Patrice saw Eric in a holding cell during one of Eric's preliminary hearings. Eric told him that their concocted story about seeing Cynthia on the 24th of November would not work due to testimony from Cynthia's neighbor, who claimed to have seen Cynthia on the 25th at Thanksgiving. He asked Patrice to testify instead that he had seen Cynthia on the 25th of November on the Thanksgiving. Eric also told Patrice that he had given the quote evil eye to a woman who had just testified at his hearing, which had made the witness cry. Ultimately, though, after being transported to court on several different days for Eric's different preliminary hearings, Patrice decided to not provide false testimony. He would later explain that had he testified as planned about Cynthia, he would not have been able to face LaShawn. After Patrice told Eric his decision, he was brought to the courtroom to talk to Eric's attorney. Patrice told the defense counsel that he would not testify as planned because it was untrue. Patrice was then visited by Deputy District Attorney Case Bates and an investigator who asked why he decided not to testify. Patrice acknowledged having concocted a full story with Eric and then changing his mind about telling it in court. He later saw Eric in a holding cell after continuing to be called for his preliminary hearings, and there, Eric offered him $5,000 to testify to having seen Cynthia on that Thanksgiving. And when Patrice asked Eric whether he had killed Cynthia, Eric responded, quote, yeah. Patrice, who had already been sentenced at the time of his meeting with the Deputy District Attorney, did not ask for or receive any compensation or leniency, nor did Patrice ask for or receive leniency when he later testified at the preliminary hearing for the prosecution, something which he had never done before. In fact, due to his cooperation with the prosecution, Patrice was disaffiliated from his gang and a, quote, green light was placed on him, meaning that gang members were supposed to attack him upon crossing his path. This saw him being placed in protective custody in prison, though this wasn't enough protection as he would actually be stabbed several times. Out of concern for Patrice's safety, the district attorney's office also gave him financial assistance to resettle elsewhere, alongside financial assistance when he would be released from custody up until his social security benefits resumed. Now, at trial, the deputy district attorney confirms that Patrice did not initiate contacts with his office, nor receive anything of value in exchange for cooperation in Eric's case. The deputy district attorney decided to meet with Patrice after seeing Patrice and the defense counsel talking in the holding cell, and then being told by defense counsel that Patrice would no longer be called as a defense witness. At their meeting, Patrice told the deputy district attorney that Eric offered to pay him to falsely testify that he had seen Cynthia in November of 2004. Patrice was told by Eric, not the deputy district attorney, that a witness, which was one of the neighbors that had said that they had seen Cynthia, had cried on the stand, and that both the neighbors had changed the date on which they had last seen Cynthia. The deputy district attorney acknowledged, later testifying on Patrice's behalf at a parole revocation hearing. He had testified about the safety repercussions of Patrice's decision to cooperate with the prosecution in Eric's case. The deputy district attorney believed that Patrice had an expectation of receiving protection in exchange for testifying, but that he didn't receive leniency on Patrice's behalf at the hearing. Now, the prosecutor admitted in her closing statement that Cynthia's body has not been found and that she didn't know how she was killed, but she said that circumstantial evidence, such as Cynthia's blood being found in Eric's house, ties Eric to her death. She told the jury, quote, "We don't know it all, but we know enough." Following closing arguments and instruction by the court, the jury deliberated for 3 days. And finally, on the 28th of February 2012, the jury rendered its verdict. And they found Eric Stewart Mora guilty of second-degree murder. The trial court thereafter sentenced Eric to 15 years to life in prison. At the sentencing hearing, Cynthia's daughter Teresa Jones, who is now 35 years old, told Eric, quote, "My mother was our everything, and you robbed her of her life." She further said that she's haunted that Eric has never disclosed where he disposed of Cynthia's body. Following the sentencing, Eric's attorney pledged to appeal, stating that there was no evidence, no body, and no witnesses to convict his client of murder. Quote, "An innocent person was convicted based on a speculative theory, and it's very disappointing." Now, in 2016, a state appellate court dismissed the 2012 conviction, stating that the trial judge wrongly barred Eric from trying to show that someone else may have killed Cynthia. Though, later that same year in 2016, Eric actually confessed to killing Cynthia and provided the general location of the buried body to the authorities, though the investigators were unable to locate her remains. A retrial took place, which found Eric Mora guilty again and therefore sentenced him in June of 2017 to 11 years in state prison. Miraculously, on the 4th of May 2022, a work crew at 7th and Maritime Streets found a body wrapped in tarps in a shallow grave.
In the East Bay, a work crew in Oakland discovered the body of a woman killed 18 years ago. The coroner has identified the body as Cynthia Linda Alonzo. She disappeared on Thanksgiving of 2004. 2 weeks ago, workers found her body wrapped in tarps in a shallow grave on the Oakland Army base. Alonzo was last seen with her boyfriend, Eric Mora, on their way to Alonzo's mother's house for dinner.
Deputy District Attorney Danielle London said in a statement, quote, "It was a long road to get here, and the family stuck with us along the way. We were relieved to have finally found Linda, Cynthia's nickname, so the family can have a proper burial. For too many years, Eric Mora denied killing Cynthia till he confessed in 2016. May Cynthia finally rest in peace." And that's everything that I have for you in this case. Patrice Fluker risked gang retaliation to testify about Eric's admission. Do you find his testimony credible given his criminal history and his deal with the prosecutors? Let me know in the comment section down below, and let me know any other thoughts you have in this case. If you have a case that you want me to cover on this channel, then go over to requestacase.com and send in your case submissions there. You can also find these videos available in audio form over on Spotify. There'll be a link in the description and maybe a QR code on screen. We'll find out. And with all that being said, I will see you in the next case.